Hello everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining. And in this session, right, we are going to continue from the yesterday session. So yesterday we have seen the Docker desktop, some basic commands, and after that the Kubernetes also we have just seen how the architecture it is like, and we have ran some type of commands. So in that one, right? So yesterday we faced some issue that so when we are updating the image name in uh, uh, so image name in the replica.yaml file. So when we are again running it, it's not updating it. Okay. So from there only we left yesterday. So in this scenario, right? I think. We should not use the replica set. In those scenario we have to use the deployment. So the replica set, it is just making sure that it will the replicas, the number of replicas we are specifying, so whether we are decreasing it or increasing it. So in that one it will be taken care, but the deployment only, it will be taken care of the all the image versions and all. Okay. So otherwise, right, yeah, still there is some possibility that it can update the image version. But for that, right, what we have to do is like we have to delete the pod, and after that we have to run the replica set again. Okay. But yeah, maybe if you're stopping, if you're killing the pod and then again it starting means, right, it's not a good practice, right? So for example, like in this uh, so I will show one thread. Okay, so here they are saying it like the replica set does not update pods in when pod image is modified. Okay, and finally what they are saying like with replica set directly you have to kill the old pod, so the new ones will be created with the right image. But okay, so in our case, right, so we have to whenever we are updating the image, it has to do automatically by the blue green deployment. So basically it has to spin up the two instances down, and it has to install the new two instances, and after that so it has to basically follow the blue green. Okay. But if you are stopping the image, sorry, if you're stopping the container, and after that if you want to maybe start it, means it's not the good practice actually. Okay. So in this scenario, so we have to use the deployment. Okay. If you are using the deployment, even if you are changing the image version or something, so that time it will work. Okay. So for example, I'm going to here but yeah, basically, right, so for example I'm running the deployment again. Okay. So to run the deployment, the command is like kubectl apply -f, and then maybe I will change the name of the file, replica.yaml file. Okay. So here I will replica.yaml. Okay, so currently, right, so it will just start whatever the container we are specifying it here, and then it will make sure that totally the four replica sets is currently running. Okay, so for example, even if I am when I'm running kubectl get parts, you can say like there are four versions actually currently running. Okay. And currently, right, so the image version, the container is using like v3. But even so the last time, right, we tried, even if you're changing to v4 or v2 something, so it's not changing, so that's the problem. Okay. But yeah, so in those scenario, so as per the article also, we should not use the replica set, we have to use the deployment. Okay. So in here, right, so I will delete this one. Maybe we don't want to delete this one, so we will create a new yaml file, deployment dot yaml file. Okay. So yeah, here for the shortcut for commenting and uncommenting, right, so you can select the entire text, and then control plus k plus c means it will comment, but control plus k plus u means it will uncomment the text. Okay, maybe yeah, this will be common for most of the IDEs like maybe the Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Eclipse, whatever the tool. For commenting the code, it is like Control K plus C, but for uncommenting, Control plus K plus U. Okay, so for example, so currently these many parts are running. So maybe what we can do is like we will again. So I will just save the file. Okay, so this is the deployment YAML file. So what it will do is like it will do the replica as to for the below containers. Like here, right, we have only one container NGINX. The image version something like 1.14.2. Okay, so I will run the deployment like so here I'm just changing the uh, deployment .yaml. Okay, so now the deployment is created. So it will pull the particular image and then it will make sure that totally the two replica set is currently running for the particular pod. Okay. Okay, so currently it is showing, right, the container is creating now. Okay, so there are something like, so currently those and all already started, but this container it's just creating. So that's why it's ready 0/1, but and also the status is something like container creating. Okay, so once it is created we will so maybe even you can run the docker also like docker ps. Okay, so this one up just 12 seconds ago. Okay, like these two, right, it was just yeah, maybe initially. So what we will do, right, like the deployment.ml file, so we will make sure that we are having the replica set of maybe yeah, the two is fine. uh, okay, so currently what we can do is like we will just change the version name like 1.14. Instead of 1.14.2 we can place it like 1.14.1. Okay, so currently what is our expectation like so it should not deploy the both maybe the container at the same time. So first so during the particular container is running, so at the time the another container it will deploy. So once it is coming into the steady state, after that only the next container it will be running, so that we are making sure that there is no downtime to our application because of the deployment. Okay, so, Mebrod, so you are clear, right? So, what we are trying here?
No, actually, I'm kind of lost.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So, the yesterday, right? So, we tried
Yeah.
one thing like the replica set. Okay. So, for example, when we are specifying, so at the time, right? So, we have specified the replica set as two, sorry, four or something. Okay. But, so currently, right? So, here you can see like this is the list of containers it is currently running, right? So these are all the list of containers running for the particular deployment.yaml file. So here we are specifying, right, for the NGINX image, it has to run the two containers. Okay, so that is why the two container is created. So this one you clear, right? So because I have just deployed the particular deployment.yaml file.
Mhm. So when you say replica two, then is it two containers? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
computer.
yeah. So for example, so here we are specifying the one container, right? Like nginx, and then the particular image we are specifying, right? So these things it will be run twice. So that is why the replicas too.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So for example, right, if you are specifying like three, it will create the new container. Maybe I will say like five container. Okay. Uh, So which means like the same image, right? Like nginx. Currently it is two. Only the two is there because our replica is two. But I will mention five here, right? So that it will create the five containers. So that is everything is based on your application traffic only, my brother. Okay. So for
Right,
example,
yeah.
your application having huge traffic. Yeah, at the time the only one container can't serve for all the requests, right? So in this scenario, if you're having many containers, so it will equally distribute the load so that your application will be healthy.
Right, got it.
Yeah. So currently, right? Yeah, here I have changed, but I need to run the deployment, right? So for example, I'm just so to making sure that to update the changes. So here I have updated the replicas, and then I have saved the file, and then here now I am updating it. Okay. Yeah, now I will check the maybe you can just instead of the Docker container PS, right? So instead of that, yeah, you can try kubectl get part so that you can understood easily because here the UI will be somewhat easier to understand. Okay, so for example here, right? So the nginx, the particular image, right? Already the two thing is running. Okay, already the two nginx is running, but additionally it is creating. Okay. Additionally, it is creating five one. So why? Because we have changed the image version also, right? From two to one, we have changed. So that is why it is creating all the five containers, but it is not stopping the other two. But it is still running the. It is still receiving the request and all. Okay, so that once the all the five is coming into the steady state, and later that the Kubernetes it will maybe the delete the particular two containers because the image is here is like 1.14.2, right? But I need the 1.14.1. So maybe
So if
yeah,
let's say the image, you don't change the image, it just instead of creating a new five
yeah,
containers, it will create like three more.
yeah, correct, exactly. Yeah. So
Oh,
instead of changing the version here, it is creating all the five, and even during the deployment, right? It is not deleting this one. So once all of them it is coming into running status, after that you cannot see this one. So after that, right? So we can. So currently, right? For the nginx itself, we are seeing totally seven containers. So
right.
seven parts. Okay. So for example, we left around 10 seconds, right? So I think mostly it will be deployed. I will running again. Okay. So currently, right? So once it is coming into the running state, the other two it is deleted. Like the KW and TF it is starting, right? So you cannot see the other two because those are all the old containers. So you
Yeah,
got it right.
that
So
is
currently you are getting only the five containers. Okay.
right.
So for example, I am just saying like I just want maybe I would say six. Okay. So in this scenario, because I'm not changing any image version, so that it will just create a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here you can see right. The only the one container is in currently in creating mode. Okay, maybe you want to do any other experiment, maybe, so you can just say, yeah, we will try that one.
Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay, yeah, okay, my brother.
So
Yeah. So the next one,
if we need like to create a new container, we need to change the image.
Yeah,
Like if we want to keep the container as is and increase maybe the same container, then we need to keep the image and increase the replica, I guess.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The concept is something. Yeah, maybe this is something easy only, right? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So and
Yeah.
maybe and maybe did you try to set up the local? Maybe is there any problem or after the restarting it is starting working?
No, it's not starting. So it's asking like the Linux cooler. Let me see.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
the Linux needs to be upgrade. That's what it is asking.
Oh, but anyway, your system is like Windows one, right? But the Linux subsystem it is asking like Windows subsystem for Linux.
Yeah, because no, it shows that currently the new way of upgrading is like we need to create a Linux kernels. I think that's what it shows.
Oh,
Linux kernels.
okay, I think right. So
No,
Mehmet, can you
Linux
please go ahead?
kernels.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. After that, you can enable. Yeah, because I'm getting echo. Okay. So for example, right. Otherwise, Mehmet, you can just try one more thing also. This is the Linux, the Windows subsystem for Linux, right? You can just try to install the newer version. So maybe that may be a fix for your problem, maybe because currently you are using Windows 10 Pro only, right? But to you for using the Linux, maybe the Docker container, yeah, you might need the Windows subsystem for Linux, and for that one, yeah, maybe you can just try. Yeah, maybe you can just try the latest Windows subsystem for Linux version. Okay. Manual install or install on Windows Server.
Yeah, I see there Linux kernels. Is it comes if you go down the
Okay, this one.
no, just the image itself, step 6, step 06, the other one. The other one, if you go down, yeah, here.
Okay, the following will
Go
open
down a little bit, yeah. If you go
your.
down,
Okay,
it shows, you go down, mm, I think Linux,
distribution.
was not Linux prescription, distribution.
Okay,
On the error itself, it shows that we need to uh, install this
okay,
Linux, yeah,
okay,
kernel, or what is that? The kernel is that
oh,
kernel? No,
okay,
go
pros
down.
or something or kernel.
Yeah,
Oh,
kernel. Yeah, I think
okay,
Linux kernel has to be installed. That's what it's showing.
okay. I think here, right? I think they
Mm.
just updated the portal. I don't know. Maybe they have recently updated. Yeah. Otherwise,
Yeah, maybe this is the one.
yeah. Yeah, okay, my brother. Yeah, maybe otherwise, right? Maybe you can just maybe if the Docker and Kubernetes installation is something challenging in your this one, maybe the local. Yeah, otherwise, right? We can directly try with cloud itself. You can create the Kubernetes cluster there, and there we can play
Oh,
around.
on the cloud. Okay.
Yeah, so on the cloud, maybe yeah, from the cloud shell, right? You can run the Docker command and all, so that it's not needed. Okay, so for example.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll try that.
yeah, yeah. Maybe for the course, right? Maybe instead of trying from your local, maybe the next one, right? We are going to create the clusters in the Kubernetes Azure. So maybe you can try with that one, so that maybe it may be easy for understanding actually. Okay. Okay. So now. Okay, Brad. So this is where we left yesterday, right? So now we understood. So we should not use the replica set for if you want to change the image version and trying that one for do that. But we have to use the deployment so that it will work as we expected. Okay, and uh, and the next thing is like Okay. So the next one, right, member. So what we are going to see, right? So I will log into portal. So member, 1 minute. So I will shut down my. I will quit my the Docker because when it is running, right, my system gets slow. Okay. So 1 minute. So I will stop the Docker.
Yeah, sure.
So member, now you can see my screen, right?
Yes, Silvan, I
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah. So the next one, right? So the Docker local setup, some kind of the Kubernetes play around, we have done that. So the next one is like the Kubernetes. So this slide also we have done, and networking. Okay. So in the last session, right? So I have said. So here we have the services also. Services also one of the object from the AKS cluster. Okay, but what is the main purpose of the services here? It is like so for example, you know that the Kubernetes is having the cluster. Under the cluster we will be having the many nodes connected to that. Okay, so when you are deploying it, right, so it will be maybe if you are deploying any kind of web application, so initially it will be communicated within the cluster alone, so it won't be exposed over the internet, or you cannot maybe access the particular web application. Okay, so to access that, maybe to access your web application outside of the world, maybe outside of the cluster, so you have to use any one of the maybe the service type, like this is what the Kubernetes networking, so you have to use any one of the service type. Okay, so the cluster IP, it is something like so by default this is the default behavior. So if you are not providing any kind of the service type there, you cannot access your web application outside. Okay, but within your web application, so within your cluster, your application can communicate with that. Okay, so for example, there the internal traffic, right, so within the cluster, maybe the multiple container or multiple pods, they can access to the particular API. Okay, so the next one is like the maybe the load balancer. The load balancer is this one. Okay, so this is for the externally to expose our web application externally. Okay, so for example, in between there may be one load balancer, and so the incoming traffic, so this is the incoming traffic, and the so we will be having the one the IP address, right, so we are specifying like the port 80, and so maybe based on our the definition, it will redirect the request to the particular the port 80, whatever the maybe the service is listening the port 80, it will be redirect to that. Okay, so mostly, right, we will be using the load balancer service type. So this is only it will allow us to access the web application. Okay, the cluster IP, right, so here there is no incoming traffic. It is the internal traffic means the traffic within the cluster only, it can access the pod or the web application, whatever the web application is running in the pod. Okay, and then the next one is like node port. Okay, the node port means also it will expose the web application outside, but here the only the caveat is like for example, under the cluster you will be having many nodes, right? So you need to know the IP address of the each node. Okay, so you can directly hit the IP address with the port, so that it will be assigned the particular request to the corresponding port. Okay, but this approach is not a maybe feasible one, because like for example, in the cloud instance, right, the always the node IP address, it will be changing it. So maybe even if you're configuring some IPs today, so maybe it doesn't mean like maybe the tomorrow also the same IP we will be having it. Okay, so that the it is in the dynamic behavior. And also, right, so currently you will be having the only one node. Okay, so the tomorrow you will have the maybe the multi huge traffic, so that you are additionally adding the two more nodes, so that you need to take a note of the two more node IP address also, so that it's not the good solution. Okay, so that we will be using the load balancer. The load balancer means like you will be having a only one IP, and the incoming traffic it will be coming. And so for example, here the port is 80, right? And so here whatever the pod is listening the port 80, it is exposing the service in port 80, then it will redirect the request to the particular pod. Okay, so now you understood, right? The cluster IP, this is only for the internal communication. So with that, you cannot access the web application from your local or outside of the cluster. And then this one is like the node port, like so you need to have the node IP address, so that. And so if you hit the node IP address with the port, so it will redirect to the particular node, and then the pod it is running in the particular node itself. Okay, but because the maybe the node maybe in the dynamic, the node IP address dynamic in the nature, so we cannot use that, so it's not a good solution. But if you are having always like only one node, two node, in this scenario we can use that. But the good solution would be the load balancer. Like here the only one public IP, and then the port we will be specifying here like 80 something. And finally it will be redirect the request to the maybe web application, which it is hosting the service or the web application in the port 80. Okay, so this is some basic about the Kubernetes networking method. So maybe in the next one, right? So when we are doing the deployment, so we will specify the service type, so that you will understood better. Maybe in the practically, yeah, we will
Sure,
see in the next the demo something. Okay.
sure. Uh, so instead of like for the load balancer, instead of having each port for every node, we just have to add the port on the load balancer, so that enable to listen the uh,
Yeah. Yeah. So
and traffic to each node according our
yeah. Yeah.
specification.
Yeah, so for example, right, so in you, so you can just assuming it like you are having a cluster. Under the cluster you are having the 10 nodes. Okay, but
Yeah,
you will be writing some YAML file that maybe you have the store API. Okay, and another one is the payment API. Okay, you have mentioned that the store API will be listening on the 80 port, and then the payment API will be listening on the port number 100. Okay, so here, right, even the 10 nodes are running. So here if you are specifying it like 80 port, so that it will go to the store API, even the regardless of the node. So wherever it is the available container, so it will redirect the request to the store API. And here if you are specifying with the public IP address, if you are specifying port 100, so it will redirect the request to the payment API. Okay, so that we don't need to consider anything on the node. So maybe the node can be like one or two, maybe whatever how many numbers we are taking it, we are just specifying like whether based on the port, whether we are going to the store or payment API somewhere, so where it has to route. So that thing we are doing. Okay.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the next one is like ingress controller. Okay. So for example here it is right, based on the so for example in our scenario, right, we will be having the many maybe application or microservices. Okay, so for example, right, maybe let's take an example of Amazon. Okay, so in Amazon, right, maybe this is something like amazon.com, and then you will be having the many maybe the path something like slash product sale slash orders slash payments. So there are many the maybe the path will be there, right, so that you can still use the single domain name, but based on the path you can redirect the service. Actually you can redirect to the corresponding service. So in that is the case, like the ingress controller, it will be coming into that picture. Okay, so the incoming traffic will be coming, and here it is like based on the maybe path we are specifying, based on that it has to route to the corresponding service, whether it is the blog service or store service, whatever it is. Okay, so based on the path. So otherwise, right, so for the block service we cannot have a one domain, and then store service we cannot have a one domain, right? For example, if you are having the 100 microservices, we cannot have the 100 domain or subdomain, right? So that is the complex process. Okay, so that what we are doing, it's like only one domain, and based on the path value appended to the domain, according to that we are just redirecting the request to the corresponding services. So for example, in your Kubernetes cluster, right, you can assuming it like the block service and store service is currently running in the maybe the 10 node, so that you don't need to know like how many nodes are present, or the configuration, everything. You are just specifying like your block, and so that it has to go to the block service endpoint, maybe the container or pod something. Okay, my bro.
So in this case, it might be one node or two node, whatever. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But we need to traffic the based on the service.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what we are.
yeah. So based on the path, maybe here, right? Here we will be having the many services also, like
Right.
account, maybe product, sales, order. So there can be many like services. So based on the path, maybe appending to the domain. So you are just appending, you are just redirecting the request to the maybe the correct part and services, so that the client also getting the corresponding responses. Okay, so otherwise, right, so for example 100 microservice you are having it. So otherwise, right, you need to have the 100 domain name, the DNS, something like at
Right.
least the subdomain you need to have, right, like blog.myapp.com, and otherwise here like store.myapp.com. So this is something maybe the complex to manage it here, right? So that if you're having it here, maybe even adding the new maybe the services also, it's very easy. But otherwise, right, we need to create some configuration in the DNS controller, and after that only they can use it. So there are many dependencies, everything, right? So if you are providing it, the developer itself, they can create it, so without any dependencies.
And even okay, so what would be the advantage? It would be easy to manage,
Yeah,
kind of thing. Let's say if later on for troubleshooting,
yeah, so for example.
if once,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. So for example, my brother, so one example, okay. So for example, right, anyway, if you want to So for example, if you want to expose, maybe if you want to access the some web API, so what is the first criteria? You need to have the public IP, right? So you need to have the public IP, and if you are hosting in any
Right.
one of the cloud platform, you first needs to purchase it. Okay, so for
Right.
example, the for every month, right, they may be charging about $10 for the for reserving one public IP. Okay, so for example, in your case, you are having the 100 services. Okay, in this scenario, you need to have the 100 public IPs. So which will be around, if for every month, right, for every public IP, if you are spending for $10, then for the 100 maybe services, you need to spend $1,000. So that is the unwanted cost, right? So that you can just reserve the only one public IP, so maybe which will route the, which will have the cname like myapp.com. Okay, and under that, maybe in the path, right, you will be specifying all the service name like blog service, store service, and even you can have a many services also like account, home, or sales, or order something. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, so that is the maybe the advantage, maybe, okay. Yeah, maybe within the only the one DNS and one public IP, you can achieve that. And also it is very easier to add also, the we don't have any dependencies, right? The developer itself, they can easily onboard the new services, because the slash store means nothing needed in the maybe the DNS configuration level. Okay, but if you want to create some new DNS or subdomain, so someone from the infra team, they have to look on it, and then after that only we can consume it. As a developer, we cannot use that. But just appending the path, right? So that's just a configuration change only at the Kubernetes level. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So the next one. Um, Okay, so we will see like the demo in the Kubernetes service. So I will show you so how to create the Kubernetes cluster in Azure cloud. Okay, so I will log into portal.azure.com. Okay, so here you can just search like AKS. So AKS means like Azure Kubernetes service. So you know already that the Kubernetes is the open source platform. So initially developed by the Google, and now they make it as the open source platform, and currently it is managed by the cloud native some company. Okay, but currently it is the open
Not
source.
by Azure.
Yeah. No, no, no. So for
Not
example,
by
right,
Microsoft.
like for example, let's say like the SQL server. You know the SQL server, right?
Right.
Okay, so SQL Server or Oracle. Okay, so even from Azure also you can host your Oracle or SQL Server, and similar like the AWS also you can host it. They will be giving us the platform as a service. Okay, so similar like that, even the Kubernetes here, it is the open source platform, and on top of it, Azure is providing some features for the manageability, and so we are just using it. So, for example, we don't need to install any kind of the Kubernetes Docker runtime, anything. We don't need to care about it. But all of the things, even the Microsoft itself, they will be providing it as the feature. Okay, so the similar like, right, the AWS also, they on top of the Kubernetes, they will have some kind of customization, and yeah, it will, yeah, it is available in on the all the platform. It's not mean like currently the Azure is managing the Kubernetes, my broad. Okay, for all the
Oh,
tools, right? Yeah, so all the tools, instead of you are managing
right.
the on premise, you are just managing it in the cloud platform. For the cloud, the installation, configuration, everything, the Azure is helping us.
Got it.
Okay, so I am just clicking on Kubernetes service, and here we are going to create a new Kubernetes service. Okay, like as I said already, right, so this is something like cluster architecture. So you will be having a only one master node, and after that you can specify how many node you need, like that is based on your requirement only, based on your application complexity and the number of microservices, and your expected traffic. That is everything based on that one. Okay, So for example,
So this is open source, you're saying, and also it depends. We can choose any node, any cluster node, meaning like whether it's 2, 3, 4,
yeah, correct.
um,
Yeah,
either 2 or 4, in like that.
yeah, yeah, correct.
So when it's open, it's free, right?
Come again, my brother. Yeah, maybe here we
Does
can.
it mean it's free?
No, it's not the free. Because right,
Mm.
for the node means like you need the so for node means right, for example VM only, in the behind the scene the node means VM
Yeah, yeah,
only, right? So the for the
yeah.
VM they
Okay.
will do the
We can upgrade.
Kubernetes,
Yeah.
the Docker installation, some kind of setup they will be install it. Okay, so as like in the VM they are charging it, right? The similar like they will charge based on the number of nodes, and then configuration
Oh.
we are requesting it.
Mhm.
Okay.
So why we are saying that it's open source then?
No, open
So
source.
the
Yeah, the open source means like the Kubernetes. The this tool is
only the
open
Kubernetes.
source. For example, right,
Oh,
the MySQL means MySQL is the maybe open source
premium.
database, right? You know, the SQL Server and
Right.
Oracle is the licensed one. MySQL is the
Right.
open source version. But if you are using, if you are
Mhm.
installing it in your local machine, no one going to ask you for the license and all. Okay, but you want to manage with the Azure or someone, right? But they are
Yeah.
hosting it in some other VM machine, and then they are doing all the patches, updates, everything. So for that it will make some charges, right? So for the maintenance
Right.
something they are charging it, the creating the
Okay. Okay.
VM and all, right? Like the VM and all, it's not even the Kubernetes is free, but the VM and all it will comes with the cost only. Even the some of the
Yeah. Okay.
security, everything they are
Yeah.
providing, right?
Kind of for free you buy and then you pay for shipping. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so
All
here,
right. Got it.
yeah, so here, right, we are saying like the resource group. Maybe I will just provide some name like RGAKS, and then here it is saying right the cluster preset configuration. Okay, quickly customize your cluster by choosing the preset now applicable. Okay, and I'm providing the name like AKS cluster, and maybe we can host it in the South India or maybe West US something, but my zone is near to the Asia Pacific, right? So that's why I'm choosing the South India. Okay, maybe in your scenario, right? So whatever the Azure region is near to you, like West US, so there are many region, right? Like East US, South, Central US, West US. So whatever the Azure region is nearer to you, so you can choose that. Okay, so since my I am near to South India, so that I'm choosing this one. Okay, and so here the Kubernetes version, right? There are many version they are providing it. So here, yeah, you can choose which version you have to use it. Okay, so for example, right, I will say what is so because right I have installed Kubernetes in my local machine. Okay, I will just verify. Yeah, I think currently I have stopped the Docker, right? So that's why it's not showing. Okay, otherwise,
Yeah.
because currently I have stopped the Docker, right? And
Yeah.
Kubernetes also. Um, okay, yeah, yeah. So currently, right? Yeah, you can choose whatever the available version you need because currently
Right.
still the
But
tool
which
is.
one is the update version?
Yeah, so currently the latest one is date 1.22.2,
Mhm.
but it is in the preview mode, like maybe the UAT or pilot mode something. Yeah, once it is
Oh, okay.
stable one, yeah, you can use that. But currently they are making the default as 1.20.9. Maybe this may
Mhm.
be the long time stable version. because the Kubernetes also they might be providing some support maybe for maybe next to 4 to 5 years, even if there is any critical bug or error. Okay, but in the newer version and all, right, there may be some bugs also possible. So that, yeah, that's up to you, that's up to us, like even if you want to use some the latest features, yeah, we can go ahead and use the latest one. But mostly the concepts, everything will be same, right? Only the UI or some other small functionalities only will be changing it. Yeah, maybe, yeah, you can choose whatever you want. Okay, but I'm just choosing the default one. Okay. Okay. So here, right, so you want to specify the node size. Like here there are many size, right? Like standard ES2 V2 is recommended for standard configuration. Yeah, you can choose that. What is your VM configuration? So here it is saying like select a VM size, right? So
So like you have to specify here like CPU, RAM,
yeah, yeah, correct.
um,
Yeah. So that is
but it
the,
shows like all. Does it show how many RAM and how many
yeah, yeah,
CPU
yeah, yeah, yeah. That is,
it
yeah,
will
yeah.
have?
Yeah, that is based on our configuration only, right? So for example, I'm
Correct.
just choosing this
Mm.
one, and here it is
Mhm.
saying like the vCPU
Oh,
4 and RAM is 16 and the data
it's
disk is this
16.
one.
Okay, okay.
And here it will show like monthly expected cost also, the cost per month. Things still is
Okay.
loading like 8,000 rupees in India. Maybe maybe in the dollar it will vary actually. Okay, maybe if you are
Yeah.
accessing, right, it will show you in the dollar cost. Okay. And
Right.
yeah, maybe if you want good RAM, right, maybe you have to go to
Mm.
the D series something, but here the cost will be higher. Okay, here the number
Right.
of input output per second. Okay, and the data disk something, the RAM. So whenever the configuration is increased, then your cost of the VM also it will be increased. Okay, but for now, right, I'm just choosing the some low configuration. It's just like learning only, right? So we are not going to do anything. Okay, and then so currently, right,
So
yeah.
when you choose like this is CPU and memory here, as it a static, meaning it doesn't matter if it's the traffic is high or low.
Yeah, so for example, right,
It will be static.
yeah. So for example, the here, so the VM performance, right, it is fully based
Right.
on the number of CPU, RAM, and Mac, the input output per second. So that is all based
Mhm.
on this one only, right? So for example,
Mhm.
your application is maybe very secured and maybe important application. Okay, and so that you will be selected based on your need. So for example, here, right, like other services, so this is something like they are just having the two vCPU and 4 GB RAM, and then 4 into 500 IOPS. But here the cost is something very low, just 4,000 only. Okay, but when you are using the higher one only, right, so that your performance will be very good, like getting the request and response, right, the performance would be very faster. Okay, so you are just selecting the node
Yeah,
configuration.
what I'm asking, right, Selva? Let's say like okay, once we choose here like CPU everything. We define the CPU and RAM.
Mm.
Then it will be static. Let's say, for
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
example,
static.
during that day, the traffic's really high, and then I want to set up like during the day it will set high CPU and RAM.
Oh,
And whereas to some after let's say after 6 p.m., I want to decrease based
yeah.
on the traffic because
Oh,
is it possible? Like if
uh,
is there
yeah.
any?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I'm
I think
asking.
that's not. I think the once you have the node configuration and all, it's static, member. Okay, like the number of
Oh,
RAM,
okay.
the data disk. Once you have selected,
Yeah.
right, so that is the static one. But you can change the number of
Okay.
nodes you are attaching to it. So, for example, so maybe the morning 9 o'clock, right? At the time, you can run only one virtual machine only. Okay, when your the traffic is increased, then you can on demand you can attach a new virtual machines automatically. So for example, right, so maybe the initially only one machine only you are having it, okay, which means like the RAM is 4 GB, okay. But when the increase, when the traffic is increased, yeah, you can attach a one more new machine, so that now your total capacity would be like 8 GB. So but that is not in the single machine, so it is the combination of the two machine. Okay, so for example, let's say the 20 request is there, means like the 10 will go to the first node and then other 10 will go to the next node. So because of the horizontal scaling, you are splitting up the load, right? Because you are saying like we can whether we can increase the scaling in the vertical manner within the single virtual machine itself. Okay, but that is somewhat costlier. Okay, so instead of keeping the same, instead of having only one node with the higher configuration, but instead of that you can keep two machines with the some medium configuration. Okay, so that also the
Okay.
cost will be somewhat lesser. So that is what they will be
Yeah.
calling it like horizontal scaling. The vertical scaling means in the same node you will be increasing the RAM and IOPS and
Right.
other stuff. Okay, the horizontal scaling
Do
means,
we automate that then?
yeah,
Do
yeah,
we
that
automate that, like set up like specific time from here to here, like from 3 morning to
yeah,
12, set this, and after
yeah,
6,
yeah.
set that.
Yeah, so even
Okay.
right, yeah. So we don't need so based on the timing whether we want to do it or not. So that is we can do
Mhm.
basically the RAM usage and CPU usage, right? So when the maybe the CPU usage is going above 70 percentage continuously for 5 minutes, yeah, we can attach a one more instance. And maybe the CPU percentage also going beyond 70 percentage for more than 10 minutes of period, yeah, we can create a new one more VM also we can attach to it. So in this way we can do that automation, scale in scale out, we can do that but it's not like maybe, yeah, even whatever you are saying that also possible maybe, but with compared to that situation, right, you can scale up and scale down based on the hardware usage, so that we can utilize the hardware effectively. So otherwise, right, so you are saying like morning 9 to 11 o'clock you have to increase the maybe the CPU RAM, okay. But in case, right, maybe the 12 after 12 o'clock you are getting the huge traffic than 11 o'clock, so that we cannot
Yeah.
we are not able to achieve the our objective, right? So that you can just focus on the hardware usage, whether the above 50 percentage or maybe, so that is depends upon the, yeah, the business criteria or something. Okay, so for example here, right, here we have selected the node size, so that is the static I said I said already. And then here it is like how you want to scale it, you can do manually, so that maybe you want to go to the portal something and then you have to 4 or 5 something, you can update to that. But otherwise, right, you can let that to be in the auto scaling, like maybe one to, so this is the minimum node, it will be always running. But when the load is increased, maybe this is the maximum the node. So once it is reached, then after that it won't scale anything. Okay, so that you can specify like you can have a 10 node, but the minimum it has to run only one. So when the load is increased, then it can reach till the 10 VM. Okay,
Okay.
and also if the load is
So
decreased,
yes,
right, the
I
VM
got
also
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
I got that. So yes, but how do we specify the time, or does it matter? Like, let's say the traffic is lower, then it will go down to
Yeah,
one
yeah,
node.
yeah,
When the traffic is higher, then it will increase the nodes.
yeah,
But do we specific time here or no?
yeah. We are
Do we
not
have
going to,
anywhere to say
yeah,
that?
yeah. We are not going to configure any timing here, but we
Oh,
can configure the CPU usage maybe. Maybe once we have
okay.
created the cluster, right? So inside that, maybe
Mhm.
we can configure it like if the CPU usage is like always above 70 percentage. For example, right? When during your starting your application, okay, at the time definitely it will go the CPU usage above 70 percentage. Okay, once it is started, then after that maybe the 20 or 30 percentage it will be utilized. Okay, but so we what we can specify specify like if the CPU usage is above 70 or 80 percentage, so even that also maybe for more than 5 minutes, after that only it has to run the particular scaling. Okay, so for example, right, in a particular 1 second it will go, the CPU usage it will go to 80 percentage, and immediately it will below, it will come below to 30 percentage. So during that scenario we don't want to scale it, right? Okay, so if the usage is like consistently 70 percentage for more than 5 minutes, at the time only it has to run uh, uh, the scaling rule. Okay, yeah, maybe we will see that one. Maybe I think inside that, right, so I think they will be providing some scaling rule also, like so here I'm saying like the minimum node is like 1, and then the maximum for now I'm just saying like 3. Okay,
Sure.
yeah. And then in addition to the primary node pool on the basic one, you can also add optional node pools to handle a variety of loads. I think this is not required.
Okay,
And
here.
enable virtual nodes. Virtual nodes allows burstable scaling backed by serverless Azure container. So this one also it's an extra thing. Okay, so maybe we don't need that one. And then virtual machine scales it, so that one not needed. And then the authentication, how we are going to authenticate. So for example, when you're having maybe the key vault or SQL server and all, right? So at the time you can directly provide the read and write access to the Kubernetes cluster. So in those scenario, you don't need to have any kind of username and password to log in from your application to connect the database. Okay, so you can choose the system assign managed identity, and then from your SQL server database, right? So there you can directly assign the permission to the Kubernetes cluster what we are going to create now. Okay, so in this scenario, right, you don't need to manage any kind of username and password, but still it is very secure than having the username and password. So now you understood, right, my brother? So what is the system assigned managed identity?
Right. So whenever there is a new login or something, then you
Yeah,
have to manage where the system level, like.
yeah. Okay, my brother. Yeah, I will say one example. Okay, so for example, right, when you are trying to connect to the SQL server, so at the time, what you will
Right.
need is like you need the username and password, right?
Right.
Okay, but what it will do when the system to system communication, your application is needs to access the database. Okay, at the time what you will do is like you will be providing the service principal. Okay, the service principal means like you have to provide the client ID and then secret ID. So similar like
Right.
what we are providing like username and password, right? So similar like
Right.
system to system communication, we need to provide a client ID and secret ID. Okay, but so this is somewhat you have to manage the secret ID somewhere very securely, right? Otherwise, it is somewhat problem even if it someone getting the gaining the access. Okay, in those scenario, like the Microsoft is providing the system assigned managed identity. Okay, so if you have chosen that one, so you can go to SQL Server, the maybe authentication and properties page, and you can directly assign the permission to the Kubernetes cluster. Like maybe this is we have created like AKS with the name of AKS cluster, right? So it will be shown there. So I can directly I can provide like yeah, this cluster is having a maybe the right permission. Okay, so that whatever the call is, maybe the database call is going from this Kubernetes cluster, then it won't ask you any client ID and secret ID or any password. If any the database call is initiated from the cluster, right, so it won't ask you any kind of client ID and secret ID or any password. Okay, but if the call is going from any other maybe the cluster or the database, yeah, it will ask you the authentication details and all. Okay, so this is what
Right.
the system assigned managed identity
Okay.
method. So you got it right. So from the system to system
Yeah.
authentication, you can do without any client ID and secret ID or any kind of password related stuff. Okay, and
So
so
whoever is able to access the DB.
Yes.
can be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, they can still use their username and password, but there is no other
Right.
secure way, right? So for example, maybe we cannot ask you to log into the data production database without username and password, so that also the security breach, right? So
Right.
for the user login, they obviously need to use the maybe the AD, the user name and password, or otherwise they can use the single sign-on or some other thing. Okay, but anyway, we have to validate the user login and role everything. Okay, but for the system to system, yeah, we can leverage this method so that we don't have any struggle that how we are going to manage the sensitive information like client ID, secret ID. So we don't need to manage it because everything it will be managed internally by Microsoft with all the advanced best security practices. Okay, so that we don't have the responsibility of the managing the user, the secret ID and password, everything. Okay. Okay. So this is something like the role-based access control. Like inside that, right? The similar like the database, right? Like you will be having the DBA role and then the database reader role, writer role, auditor role, right? So similar like here also something the role-based access control is there, whether we want to enable it or disable it. So this is what this one. And AKS managed Azure directory something. Okay. And then the all the
So if
node.
we
Yeah.
okay, if we have it here, then we should provide individually or
Uh,
whoever is able to access using this system assigned managed identity or like system level, whoever has that access from the DV will have automatically maybe a role-based
yeah,
access
correct.
also, or we
Yeah.
have to
Yeah, for the users,
specify it.
yeah, for everyone,
Mm.
right? For the Kubernetes
Yeah.
cluster also needs to follow the role-based to access only. Like it can do only the write and deploy permission. We cannot provide the Kubernetes cluster to manage or administrate the cluster, right? But anyway, so all the things it will based on the role based access only. Even the system assigned managed identity also it will have the restrictive permission only. We cannot provide the access to the deleting the cluster or changing the node configuration and all, right? We can just to provide it like you can just to fetch maybe for example, right? We are just providing the Kubernetes cluster to do the read and write permission on the database table. Okay, but we should not
Mhm.
provide the database deletion or backup related permission to the AKS cluster. Okay, so in this scenario, right? So for example, we are providing the full access to the AKS cluster on the database. Okay, for example, if someone writing the script in the someone is gaining the access to the AKS cluster and writing the some commands like dropping the database, which means like it will delete the entire database. So we don't want, right? So always we have to follow the role based access only. Even the Kubernetes cluster also, it's just a need the read and write permission on the database table. Okay, because it has to add or delete or update some entries in the database table rows. Okay, but we don't need to provide the entire managing the database or the DBA related permission role. We should not provide it. So that's what the role based access control. So similar like the database, even the Kubernetes also having some kind of role. So that one we are just enabling it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, my bad. So and then here, right, like the node pool OS disk encryption. Okay. So for example, right, for even in our system also to for more secure, for some of the clients they will do encrypt our entire the disk itself, so that even if you lost the laptop, they cannot get the actual information from the database. So similar like for example, anyway you have the 10 nodes, right? The 10 nodes, the data disk we will be encrypting it. So the this one, right? The encryption at rest with the platform managed key. So which means like the Microsoft itself, it will do the encryption, the OS, the data disk, everything, right? It will do the encryption. So that is one layer of one more security here. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
So this is like system level, I mean, the system level
yeah,
encryption.
yeah. So
Like
for example,
after we set up, it will be
yeah,
encrypted.
yeah. For
Okay.
example, right? So
Do
this
we
is,
manage the encryption, or is there any um, any expiration with the key, anything, or
yeah,
not?
yeah. So for example,
To be
right?
managed
Yeah.
exactly.
So currently, this is the platform managed key is something like it is fully managed by the Microsoft itself. Like key
Oh,
rotation on expire, we have to rotate the new key, everything, right? It the
mm,
Microsoft itself it will manage everything. Okay. In some scenario, if your application is very secured one, at the time you can go ahead and choose the customer managed key. Okay. But at the time you have to provide your key, like this is the disk encryption set, right? So you have to provide
uh-huh.
your key in this place, so that even if maybe your key is will be expired in the next month, which means like before that you only have to rotate the keys and everything. So in this scenario, if you are using the customer managed key, you only provide the key everything, and on expiration also you have to rotate the key. But in the platform managed key, the Microsoft itself it will they will handle everything. You don't need to do any operation. But with compared to that, so far some of the example, right? For some scenario you are handling some banking financial related data or customer data. In those scenario, even you are not you don't it's not the good complaints to use the Microsoft managed key. Okay, even we don't know what they are doing in the behind the scene. Okay, in those scenario, yeah, you can use the customer managed key so that you will have the full control. Even the Microsoft thinking that see the details, they cannot see it if you are using the customer managed key, because all the key password everything we only will have a full control on it. Okay, my brother.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then
Can we get like 5 minutes break?
yeah. Okay,
Can
my brother.
drink
Yeah, we will.
something water.
Yeah. So next one is my brother, the networking tab. Okay, so here we can just leave it for the default settings, because the networking also it's a very large topic here, like public network, private network, and so there are many things actually basically here. Okay, so for now we can just make it whatever the default one is there, we can leave that one, because here the traffic routing and there are many advanced concepts so that are relevant to Azure architect related concepts. And then the security also, whether you want to create the private cluster, public cluster. Okay, and maybe so the one thing, like the IP ranges, right? So in which IP range you have to allow. Maybe if you're accessing the cluster, maybe you can allow your IP range here so that you can access it, but I cannot access your cluster from my location. Okay, so this is something related to the maybe the networking level. And then the integration, maybe if there is any container registry, I have said, right, the Docker hub we have discussed the yesterday, right? So similar like the Azure container registry, this is something uh, maybe the storage for the images. So if you can configure it here, but currently we don't have any container registry, right? So but if you want, yeah, you can integrate here, so that whenever the deployment is needed, it will directly fetch the image from the particular container registry. And then the Azure monitor, so here, right, whenever the CPU and memory, the memory means like a RAM, the random access memory. So this and all, it will be the memory and the CPU metrics will be there in the monitor, so that based on that, yeah, you can do some actions like triggering the alert or those things. Yeah, you can do that. So that's why, yeah, here we are enabling it. But yeah, maybe if you are if whatever the features you are choosing, so accordingly your cost for the cluster also it will be increased. But if you don't want, yeah, you can just ignore it by just saying the disabled. Okay, and then here the Azure policy, like whether it is enabled or not. The policy means, right, so for example enforcing certain kind of rules. Okay, so for example, we can make it like so let's say you are creating an some one resource in South India. Okay, so that you should not, maybe it's not the good solution, right? So for example your company is based in USA, and your customers also based in the USA only. Okay, but when you are creating some kind of Azure resources, instead of choosing the nearby Azure region, you are maybe mistakenly you are choosing maybe South India or Japan or China or some other region, you are choosing it. Okay, so in those scenario, maybe we should not allow you to create the resources. Okay, you have to maybe the Azure, right, it has to allow you to create the maybe VM or AKS cluster only in the East US region. In those scenario, yeah, maybe you can enable the Azure policies, and you can assign some kind of policies and all. Okay, so that is what the meaning actually. They are just enforcing certain kind of rules. So one thing is like you are maybe all the resources you are created in the Azure, it should be in the East US. So that is the one kind of rule. And another one rule is like whatever the VM or node pool you are having, everything should be encrypted at the rest. Okay, so that is the another one rule. And one more rule can be like so during the transit, right, the data transit, you have to use the HTTPS communication instead of HTTP protocol. That is the not secured one. Okay, so those kind of policies you can enforce it. So if you are enabling it, you can enforce it. That is what the meaning it is. So maybe, so I think you can ignore the networking, but other than maybe this thing, maybe it's a good to know that. Okay, the container registry, so that is for
Right.
maybe the storing the images. The monitor means like if you're enabling it, it will it have the metrics for the CPU and the memory, the metrics, the usage something, and based on that you can configure some alert or maybe the action you can do that. And then the Azure policy means like you can enforce certain rules in the Azure subscription or resource group level. So for example, right, I'm enforcing the encryption, the particular policy in the resource group level. Okay, in those scenario, inside the resource group you cannot create the virtual machine without the encryption specified in the OS disk. So that is what the meaning it is. So now you got it, right, what is the Azure policy? Yeah,
No, can you
yeah,
say it
yeah,
again?
yeah, it is basically abroad like whether so for example all the big organization, right, so they will be having
Mm.
some kind of complaints. Okay, like for
Oh,
example,
okay, okay.
so for example you are having one organization. Okay, so for example these are maybe the HIPAA complaints and PCI complaints, there are many
Oh,
complaints and all there, right? So
yeah.
whatever the information you are having, that should be encrypted, because you should not
Mm-hmm.
let others to see the customer's personal data. So that is the one policy, right? Okay, so to
Yeah.
enforce that, what you will do, so that you will be doing encryption, the you will do encrypt the OS disk or temporary disk, so that your complaints to the particular policy. Okay, so
But we
similarly,
have to set up the policy which one needs to be encrypted.
yeah,
And provide the NPI, maybe NPI column also
yeah, yeah,
detailed here, or
yeah,
we
yeah,
just have to enable it.
yeah. So for example here we can enable it, and once we have created it, so
Yeah.
there we can assign the policy definition. Okay, maybe after creating the cluster, right, I will show you. Okay, so for example the next step is like
And,
yeah,
Salman, when you say that ignore the networking, what do you mean? Who is setting configuring network in
yeah,
the ring scenario?
yeah, okay. So for example, maybe the DevOps, right? So for example,
Uh,
sometimes yeah, DevOps also they need to create the all the resources. We need to have the networking knowledge and all the knowledge we need to have it. Okay, but this is something a very very big topic. Maybe it's like you want to know like the virtual network and then the subnet, and under the subnet we will be having the network security group. Okay, and then web application firewall, but actually this is something more concepts involved, my brother. Okay, maybe I'm
so
not
network team will cover this part, this configuration part, or I mean, in the need scenario like DevOps
yeah,
has some. Oh,
yeah, this is actually my brother. So since this is the very big topic, right, so there is some another course is there, maybe otherwise, right, I will show you some kind of overview there. Okay, So for example,
Oh,
for example, you are creating the virtual machine. Okay. At the time, virtual net is needed or not. Maybe the virtual network is needed or not.
mhm,
So it is definitely needed, right? So for example,
yeah.
within your network only you can host your virtual machine. Okay. And
Mhm,
within the virtual network you will be slicing the IP address, so that is called subnet. Okay. So for example, in your organization, right, you will be having the one virtual network, so something like so CID.
So what I mean is like, so okay, in this case, the network team should take care of this crime,
And
not the developer or DBA.
yeah, the developer obviously they won't coming into here, but the DevOps needs to have the networking knowledge, everything. But the DBA doesn't needs to do anything on the networking. But the networking, there will be some networking guy will be there, and also the developer they won't go and create any kind of resources. Okay, only the DevOps
Understand.
or someone or the cloud architect, right? So they only will have some certain guidance for creating the Kubernetes cluster. Okay. And
Okay.
also this one, right, even you won't be creating any kind of cluster, even if you are saying one organization, right, for all the for one organization they will maintain only one cluster once it is created. And inside that they will do the deployments alone. They won't create the new cluster for every project or every application. For one company
Mhm.
only one cluster for every environment. Okay. And when the number of application is increased, they will add the number of nodes automatically. So based on the
Oh,
resource they will automatically add. But you are not going to worry about like the virtual network who is
right.
going to create, or the cluster.
Uh,
Even the cluster also we won't be creating it. Okay, because other
uh,
platform team is there, right? So they will be managing the
right.
cluster. So for every project, right, you will be just going to deploy the containers in their Kubernetes cluster. Okay.
Mhm.
For example, you are
Understand.
not going to create a cluster for every application or for every application team. Okay, so some other team already will be managing the Kubernetes cluster in your company. And maybe right in the maybe practical scenario, they will be having more than 100 or thousands of node actually. Okay, so then only, right, so even they will be having the 10 or 20 projects within the same organizations. So that obviously they need that much of the node to handle the request, the application, everything.
All right. Got it.
Okay, my
So
friend.
what is this Azure CIN?
Azure
Is it
C,
kind of network? Mm.
Azure CNI.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something the network plugin, my brother. So even here, right? So this is
Mm.
something like within the Kubernetes cluster. So for example, you will be having that 10 nodes, right? And for example, here you have the master and the child node, right? So how the master and the child will communicate with that? And within the child also, right? There are hundreds of child nodes there. How it will going to communicate? Okay, so there are actually there are two things like the kubenet, okay, and then the Azure CNI, and which network configuration you are going to follow within the cluster. Okay, so there is something like kubenet and Azure CNI. And maybe, yeah, so I think the kubenet may be the latest one maybe, and the CNI may be the old one. So that's why maybe here by default they are selecting the kubenet. Okay, so for example here, right, the kubenet networking plugin creates a new vnet for your cluster using default values. Network allows cluster to use a new or existing vnet with a customizable address. Application parts connected directly to the vnet, which allows for native integration with the vnet features. Okay, so for example,
Mm.
inside the Kubernetes cluster also, right, so there will be some kind of uh, uh, the networking also. So even the virtual network we know that is there in the Azure. Okay, maybe for connecting from AKS to SQL Server, and so those things. Okay, but inside the Kubernetes cluster also, the Kubernetes will create some virtual network. So at the time, whether we are going to use the kubenet or Azure CNI. Okay,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think most the so I think, right, so if you know the those topics known that, so that you can choose the anyone. But anyway, right, but the inside the cluster we are not going to anything like what it is happening. So which request is going to which node, everything we are not going to see, but all of the things the Kubernetes it will handle everything. Like so which container or pod is healthy. So if you are providing the request to the particular container, so that the request we will get sooner. So those kind of like analytics and maybe the intelligence and all, the Kubernetes it will take care everything. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. So for example, yeah, if you are once we have created, right, so it will create the cluster. So the next, so instead of creating here, right, so we will create some demo project. So even we can let that one also will create it. So it will basically it will take some time and so I think currently it is doing some deployment, right? It will take some time, but in the meantime, right, we will create some dummy project. Here actually I'm choosing the AKS template. So for example, here it is deploying ASP.NET React application which uses app service AKS Cosmos DB something. And
maybe close to living here.
yeah, so here MySQL database, and maybe we will choose only for the AKS. Here it is there, AKS deploying ASP.NET Core application. Okay. Okay, so here I am choosing Azure Kubernetes service. Mm, okay, maybe here we can AKS. Okay, think there will be another new project there. Smart hotel. Okay. I think this is something using Azure Function, Cognitive Services, something. So I think we don't need this one. We will choose this. So currently it is cloning. I think all the example here I'm having is something like Azure App Service only. Okay, I think here. Okay, I think here it is created. I think actually abroad here it is something like advanced level AKS is here. Maybe what I will do is like I will create maybe another project like from the deployment.yaml file how we can deploy it. Maybe that one I will maybe create a one in the weekend and then we will see in the Monday or in your Sunday night, right? So at the time we can see my brother. Okay. So whatever the project we are cloning here, right? So this is something like very, very advanced level. So using the Helm chart something. Uh, This is the backend, and from the website, here they are deploying from this place. So otherwise, right, one more thing we can try AKS demo hyphen. So we can choose this Azure Kubernetes service. So my brother, so here the AKS cluster is here created here, right? Like here it is created. Okay, so once this project is cloned, yeah, we will see. Okay, I think here you can ask the right, I think policies. Okay, so for example, this is the Kubernetes the page, and here you can see the policies, right? To check the complaint state of the policies, we have to go to here. Okay, so currently I'm in policy, right? So for example, I'm clicking on definitions. So the definition means it's basically the policy. Okay. And then here I am selecting the particular AKS or something like here I'm choosing the particular service like a Kubernetes service. Yeah, I'm just choosing the Kubernetes one. Okay. So currently these many built-in policies there. Okay, so for example, one thing like Azure Kubernetes service private cluster should be enabled. Okay, we should not use the public cluster because public cluster means anyone can hit our endpoint, whoever in the
Right.
internet. Okay, so this is the one of the policy. Okay, so I'm just clicking on the policy here, and then assigning it to my our resource group are our subscription. Okay, so for example, I'm choosing my subscription, and yeah, we can optionally you can choose the resource group. Okay, so now you can tell me, so we have created one AKS, so this policy is satisfied, it's not complaint to that policy, it is not complaints to this policy, right? Because we didn't enable the private cluster.
Right.
Okay, so that it will show like it's non-compliant. Okay, so something like I'm just selecting it, and here I will just enable. So I think this policy enforcement means so if it is disabled means it will just show like this is non-compliant. Enabled means it will force us to modify the private cluster property. Otherwise, even if anyone is created the policy newly, right, At
So
the
it
time,
will throw a
yeah,
violation.
yeah, it won't allow you to create the resource. Like whenever you are
Mhm.
creating the review plus create, right, so it will show like
Yeah.
validation successful. But if you are specifying like enabled, it will show like the policy violation or something, so
Mm.
that we can't create the resource. So something like in the database you will be having the constraint and all, right? Okay, the similar like here it is the policy. Okay, and then I
Okay.
assigned by Tamil Selvan. Okay, and then I'm just creating it.
Can you try the into enable? See what?
Sorry.
Can you do the enable it? Then we can see what uh, error will throw.
So you're asking me to go to Kubernetes or?
To enable it.
Okay, yeah, this is just I have enabled, right?
Yeah, or just
I have just enable. So here, right, I am okay. You are saying like you are asking me to enable it. Okay,
yes, it enforce the policy.
yeah. So for example,
See what. Mm.
okay, currently it is enabled. Okay, so now I am going to Kubernetes.
Mhm.
Clicking on policies. Okay, I think it will take some time to show the result, whether it is compliant or non-compliant.
Okay.
So otherwise I will go to policy here, and
Maybe on the compliance under
yeah,
compliance.
yeah, here, right, in the policy overview it will show like private. So this is
Non-compliance.
not started yet.
Mhm.
Okay, uh, like this one I think it will take some time, Mebrat. Okay,
Mhm.
after once the policy rule is running, right, after that it will show like non-compliant, because we have the one Kubernetes cluster with the public cluster. It's not the Kubernetes, the private
Mhm.
cluster. Okay, I think we will come to this one after
What is
five
the
minutes.
first one? It's not the one that it shows
Yeah,
non-compliance.
this is
That
not the
one.
one, because I'm already having another
Oh.
policies. So that is what it's showing like,
Oh.
because this one, right, this one is something
Mhm.
like all your the OS disk, right, it should be encrypted. Okay, so currently I didn't choose the encrypt or something, right? I don't know, maybe that, because this one I created very long back, my bro.
Okay.
Okay, so I think here we'll see, I think yeah, so here it is started, right? It's showing like non-compliant. Earlier it showed like not started, but after the, maybe it will take some time. Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 minutes it will take, and it's showing like non-compliant, because when I'm going here, cluster should be this one, assignment ID, and here the AKS cluster is non-compliant, because this is not, we are not enabling the private cluster. So here you can see, right, under the policy what are all the resources are not non-compliant. So our AKS cluster is non-compliant. So resource compliance AKS cluster non-compliant, here it is showing, right? Yeah, this is what it is, Mebrod. Okay.
It's all right. Okay.
Yeah, so now the project is created. Going to the project. Okay, so here in the pipeline, okay, they have the build. So we will see how they are deploying it. Going to release pipeline and clicking on edit. Yeah, so here, right, so they are just doing the deployment and services in AKS and upload the images in AKS. Okay, that we can use it. And also, right, so here they are doing some kind of SQL execution also. Maybe in this task, right, the DB deployment they are doing it, maybe this may be helpful to you. Okay, because you want to automate the DB only, right? So here what they are doing it like, we need to provide the subscription, SQL Server authentication. Yeah, maybe how we are going to authenticate the server IP or host name and database name, user ID, password we have to provide. And then here the deploy type, SQL DAC pack file. Is there anything you know?
What was that dark part? I know.
But even I'm also not aware. Abroad. Maybe I
Mm,
think right. So even they are having some dot pack file, right? Yeah, I think from here it will have some kind of SQL related files, I guess. Okay, yeah, maybe we will go one by one. Mm. So maybe so did you see right? So how I have cloned the project? Maybe this one, right? Maybe you can just try in your weekend and then let me know. So only it's not a very big problem. So I will just explain you the how the source code is structured. Okay. So for example,
okay.
this is the repository. This is the only one project. Okay, like this is the .NET core, the .NET projects. Okay, because this having the controller infrastructure, the CS project extension. So you are going to containerize the particular this project only, you are going to do that. Okay, and you know that the Azure pipelines having the so all the build and this pipeline you are having it. Okay, and then here right, so the aks file. Okay, so here the mhc, the aks.yaml file is here, right? So we have deployed some kind of yaml file, right? So here the deployment kind, and here they are saying the container is something like redis, and then the container port is exposing in the 6379. Okay, so this is the file they will be using in the build and release pipeline. You got it, my bro?
Yeah.
Okay, and then one more thing is like, so for example, this is the for example, you have the source code repository, and then the docker file you would have how they are creating the image. So for example, inside the API, so somewhere they will keep the docker file too. Okay, and then the Azure pipelines we have the CI/CD, and then this file only you need, like how they are doing the deployment. So already they have everything mapped, so you don't need to do anything. Okay, so for example, in your perspective, what you have to do is like, first you have to start the build. Okay, I'm just clicking on the run build.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think something it is expecting the um, maybe we will go to the other pipeline. Yeah, maybe you can choose this pipeline for now, edit. I think it will actually ask the subscription maybe. Okay, and here we don't need to provide anything. Here also nothing. Okay, okay. I think container registry. I think here, right, the container registry we don't have, we are not created any container registry, right? So that is the problem. Okay, here you can choose the Azure subscription, and I'm just clicking on login to the Microsoft account.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the portal also I will create the container registry. Okay, so for example, right, I we didn't create any kind of a registry here, right? So I think we have to create the new one only. So here ACR, uh, okay, the container registry here, right? So this is where we will be storing the image, right? Mebrot, like a Docker Hub.
Right.
Okay, and here maybe I'm just using the existing one. and ACR December 3 4 something. Okay, some character. Okay, I think it won't allow some hyphen and all. And
Okay.
so the cluster and both are in the same region. I think still it is validating. Okay, and then I'm just choosing the basic one. Okay, and the networking you can connect to this registry either public key or via public address. Okay. Mm, okay. I think private access means we need to provide the premium option, but we are choosing the standard only, right? So that yeah, even if it is exposing to the public, that is fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just created the container registry. Okay, so I will, yeah, similar like my bread. Okay, so what you have to do is right. So here you have to populate the container registry. Okay, and apart from that, you do not need to do anything. Okay, here you have choose the subscription, and then once you have created the container registry here, right? So it will come here. Okay, it will take some time, I guess. Yeah, here you can see, right? So the one we have which we created here, it is coming here. Yeah, this one only we created now, right? Abroad.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So and then other things you don't need to change anything, okay? And then here also like subscription you have to choose, and then container registry. Okay, and then here apart from that no changes, and then here also in this service also you have to choose the subscription and container registry. Okay, and then the log service also, this one you have to choose. Okay, but apart from that it is good. I think this is just a copy file and then publishing artifact. Okay, I'm just saving and queue. Okay, now it is started to running because earlier it was showing some error, right? Because we are not
Mhm.
we are not selecting the subscription and ACR everything. And here okay, this is something parallel we don't have. What we can do, I think I am utilize the maximum, I guess. So you understood, right, my brother? Like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
currently, right, the parallel and usage here something. I think so here under the parallel jobs, I guess parallel jobs. I think they would provide only 1,800 minutes, right? So currently, I have utilized that one, I guess. Mm, so currently zero parallel jobs, self-hosted
Yeah.
jobs, one parallel, and I think monthly purchase. So you can see in your screen, remember maybe in your DevOps organization, right? You can see what is the configuration there. Are you
Okay.
so, Membrad, otherwise, right? Maybe you know, right, what you have to change now. Okay, maybe you can just try by yourself, Membrad. Like after changing something, you can just try to run the build pipeline, and then we will continue the same from Monday or in your Sunday morning. Sorry, Sunday evening.
Right. Okay.
Okay, you
I
can just
understand.
but anyway, right?
Yeah.
So you can just try by yourself by running the build
Yeah.
pipeline and deployment pipeline, and you can create the
Mm.
resources in Azure also. Okay, basically you need to
Okay.
create the AKS cluster, container registry, and then SQL server also. For example, this
Right.
sample application requires the SQL server also. Okay, and after that you can just
All right.
try to update everything, and if you have any doubts, yeah, we will see in the Sunday evening in your time class. Okay, yeah, thanks for
All right. Yeah.
joining,
Thank
my
you.
brother.
That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
thank you, good night,
Thank
bye.
you. You too. Good night.